So in this video, I want to talk about the elections in the Russian-occupied oblasts in Ukraine that just took place this week. So can we trust the results, or what were the results, or those kind of questions? That's what I want to address here. We're going to start with RT and see how they covered it. So we're going to listen to this, and then we're going to look at what the actual results were, and then I'm going to just do some math with you and work our way through what has been reported in the past and do some comparisons and see if this all makes sense. So here we go. Let's listen to what is said on RT.
For the first time since joining the Russian Federation Donbass region, residents have been casting their votes in local elections, with almost all polling stations already wrapped up. Elections were held in the face of Ukrainian shelling and despite threats from Washington. RT correspondent Steve Sweeney has details from the Donetsk Republic.
The first elections in the region for almost a decade. We're at one of more than 600 polling stations that have been set up across the region, and people were...
Okay, so the reason that they're at these polling stations right now are that across Russia, these elections are happening, and these occupied areas of Ukraine that are considered Russia, according to the Russians, are being part of this election. Okay.
Cast their vote for representatives in local and regional parliaments. Now, turnout has been relatively high. Some 40% took part in early voting and nearly 60% in the opening of polling on Friday. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing this protective...
Yeah, why is he wearing this protective gear when this lady and this lady and this lady and this lady and her child are not wearing anything protective? Yeah, I mean, this is kind of dramatic, isn't it? Yeah, okay.
Vest and helmet. Well, put quite simply, it's because polling stations are under a threat from Ukrainian attack. This polling station, in fact...
And it is true that the Ukrainians blew up a polling station at night, but they're not under attack, like he's saying.
Itself was struck during the referendum and 2 people were killed. But as you can see, it hasn't deterred the people from taking part in the democratic process.
The elections in the Donetsk People's Republic are a very important political event. They are an important event for our region because, since we have become a part of the Russian Federation, these are the first polls of such scale. So we need to make a conscious and important choice towards the further development of our region.
Okay, so these are man-on-the-street interviews. Anybody can say anything. This guy here is about to say essentially nothing. Keep going.
Elections have always been important for me because that's how we elect people who will develop our districts and towns.
As voting opened, this apartment block next to the polling station was damaged in a Ukrainian attack. Despite the extreme conditions, observers say the elections have been open and transparent. Not everyone is happy, however. Washington has reportedly vowed to sanction...
Okay, notice how he has to hand over his Russian passport in order to do this, because the Russians are controlling their people by making them use Russian rather than Ukrainian passports. And in fact, in order to get life-saving food and medicine and supplies and things along those lines. And I talked about that yesterday in my recap.
Sanction those supporting the poll. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken had this to say.
The United States will never recognize the Russian Federation's claims to any of Ukraine's sovereign territory.
Why does Blinken sound all of a sudden like Dracula? I don't understand that.
And we remind any individuals who may support Russia's Sham elections in Ukraine, including by acting as so-called international observers, that they may be subject to sanctions and visa restrictions.
And they're not going to support it, and they shouldn't support it, and you should not recognize these sham elections, which is what they are.
Surprisingly, perhaps, Kiev refuses to acknowledge the elections, and officials have reported attempts to sabotage the process, including cyber attacks and, of course, the intensification of the shelling of civilian areas in order to deter people from voting. Now,
again, the second time he talked about shelling civilian areas, they focused on a building that was hurt. They're doing that intentionally.
These are the first elections that have taken place here since 2014, but also the first time voting has taken place since Donetsk was incorporated into the Russian Federation. We've spoken...
Also illegally, and I'll show you mathematically just how illegal that is before we're done.
To people that have cast their ballot here, and they've described it as a day of happiness, an important day in the democratic
Day of happiness. He doesn't exactly look all that happy to me, but we'll see about that.
future of the region.
This is very important because we are for a united Russia, and a united Russia it will always be.
And some guys like this old timer may have pined for the Soviet Union and be very happy to see a united Russia. I'm not saying that everybody is against this. I'm just saying not as many people as they say are actually for it.
I've dreamed about it for a long time. These elections are somewhat of a holiday for us.
Today I have come to vote for our future and for peace, so that our children can laugh and young people can study according to their wishes, so that people can work, feel secure and ensure a normal and beautiful life, for the development of our region of the Donbass, so that our country can prosper, be strong, confident and be respected throughout the world.
Now, if he's saying our country as Russia, there's a better way to be strong, prosperous, and respected throughout the world. But this is Ukraine.
That's what I vote for.
Voting concludes on Sunday, and despite the best efforts of Ukrainian forces, and we've heard shelling around this polling station, the election seems to have run smoothly. Political parties have campaigned freely and openly, holding...
Have they really? Free and open? Do you have a lot of that in Russia? We'll talk about that in a bit.
Street stalls and other activities, while billboards have been up across the region. We're expecting the results sometime on Sunday evening, as democracy will have spoken in the region once more. This is Steve Sweeney in the Donetsk Republic for RT.
Okay, so what were the results? Not surprisingly, Russia says that its ruling party has won most of the votes in the elections in occupied Ukraine. Who would have thought? I mean, it's amazing that that would have happened, considering that, the Ukrainians say that they don't really want it, but they must really want it. Okay, let's look at AP and see what happened. So this is an AP article. Russia says its ruling party wins most of the votes. Just want to highlight this. Russia's Central Election Commission head Ella Pamfilia said that the turnout, averaging 43.5%, was the highest since 2016. That's across all of Russia. The voting was 43.5%. Now that's a normal baseline, pretty kind of normal thing. I'm surprised it's that high when you don't have real candidates in many cases, but okay. The figure includes Russia and the occupied Ukrainian regions. Marina Zakharova, the Russia-installed chair of the Kherson Election Commission, said on Sunday that 65.36% of Kherson residents cast ballots in the election. Now, there's a couple things here. One, you don't control all of Kherson or Donetsk or Luhansk or whatever, right? So if you don't control all of it, how is it 20 plus points higher? 43%, 43.5 to 65.36. So there's 20 some odd points higher, and you don't control all the region. Are they just that excited to be pro-Russian? Is that the case that you want to make? It just doesn't seem right. Okay, let's go back and look at the 2014 election, the Crimean status referendum. And now they're learning their lesson. They're saying it's only 65% of whatever they fraudulently do here. Here in the Crimean election, there was a 97% vote and 83% turnout within Crimea and 89% turnout in Sevastopol. Okay, you have a normal election, they just said, had a 43.5% turnout. And in Crimea, they said that there was an 83% or 89%, depending on Sevastopol or Crimea. Doesn't that even make sense? Now, I want to show you something else here that's really important. At 2014, there was about 1,500,000 total registered voters, right? 1,500,000, okay? Now, let's go back to a previous election. This is the 2010 Crimean parliamentary election. And it doesn't really matter as long as it's before 2014, so you can see kind of what's going on. But there was a turnout of only a little less than 997,000 in that election. And what you see is that that's about 65% of the vote, 99,000 out of, so 65, as opposed to what they said was happening in 2014, which was a lot higher. It's just like you're going to have 83% turnout and 89%. So in Crimea, they were voting at a much higher rate. In that fraudulent election where there's a gun to your head and the people came in. So something's not right one way or another there. But lest I get this wrong, were Crimeans really pro-Russian before annexation? And this is by Dr. Eleanor Knott. She's an assistant professor of qualitative methods at the LSE, the London School of Economics. I've been on multiple dissertation committees. I get out of the way of the methodologists because they know what they're doing with numbers. Here's what she found. My research shows that it's likely that Crimea was not passportized by Russia prior to annexation because Crimean residents viewed Russian citizenship as inaccessible, undesirable, illegitimate, and illegal. Only the minority of pro-Russian parties wanted Russian citizenship. Like, that's not what the Crimeans desired before they were taken over. They wanted it to provide leverage against Ukraine, but Russian citizenship was not accessible to them. It was illegal by Ukrainian law, and Russia did not seem to facilitate access to Russian citizenship in Crimea, even for those pro-Russian parties. Instead, most people I interviewed in Crimea saw Russian citizenship as illegal and pointless. Even if Russian citizenship had been accessible for them, it still would have been undesirable. Now, a little bit further down, Ukraine's party of power, the Party of Regions, led by Viktor Yanukovych, was highly corrupt and used control in Crimea for profit. But pro-Russian political parties in Crimea were also highly corrupt. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Pro-Russian political parties were unsuccessful in Crimea for two reasons. Were they unsuccessful? Let's go back and look at it in 2010. The Party of Regions, this is Yanukovych's party, had about 50% of it, and then the rest was just a scattering of different parties, including the pro-Russian party. So they weren't actually very successful after all. The pro-Russian parties were unsuccessful in Crimea for two reasons. First, their ideology failed to appeal. Second, their style of politics through corruption and organized crime made these parties illegitimate and unpopular to voters. These facts should lead us to question, was annexation more about pro-Russian nationalism or furthering profit from corruption and organized crime? That's possibly what's been going on. In fact, that looks very likely. So the numbers just don't add up. And so I thought about it some more and I said, okay, what's another analog that we can look at to see whether the elections are what they should be? Because remember, they were saying in this article here that 65.36% of Kherson residents cast ballots in this election. And again, you don't control the entirety of Kherson. So 65%, does that even make sense? So as an analog, we look at Rostov, which is right on the border of Luhansk and Donetsk, right? And so it should be a pretty good analog. How did they vote in previous elections? What percentage? And then we'll see how these guys voted, right? And we know that 65% in Kherson. Okay. So Rostov, it's interesting. This was the Rostov constituency on Wikipedia, and we look at, there's 422,000 registered voters. And in the last election in 2021, we saw 197,000 actually cast a vote. So what's the percentage? Well, 46% actually voted in Rostov, which is right on the border of the occupied oblasts in Ukraine. And so that kind of makes sense. 46% here, and we had 43.5% across all of Russia. That seems to make sense. But this jump to 65% doesn't make any sense to my mind, especially when you consider that, again, you don't control all the territory. So let's look at one more thing, and that's this. The 22 annexation referendums in Ukraine. Let's look at how these all played out. So the results, according to the Russian Central Election Commission, which, again, I don't really believe I can trust, but let's say, okay, 99.23% in the DPR and LPR, and again, you don't control all of it. Maybe that's inflating it, maybe that's bringing it down, but 99% supported annexation in Donetsk and 98% in Luhansk. The turnouts, though, were remarkable, 97.51% and 94.15%, and that's what I want to look at. The percentage of those that turned out, 97 and 94, when what we know is that in most scenarios, it's what, about 43%? Does that make sense? Let's go back a little bit further. Here we have in Kherson region, 87.5% supported the annexation of Russia with, turnout of 76%. That seems pretty high too. Same thing down here in Zaporizhia. The turnout was 85.4%, or essentially double what the turnout is here. Now, it's a more important election, but it doesn't make sense. And what they're doing is basically holding a sham election, pretending that they're having this, stuffing the ballot boxes, and then saying, see, we have these people elected. And who won? Unsurprisingly, Russia's ruling party won most of the votes. Who would have thought? Okay, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. If I'm wrong, tell me how I'm wrong. Put it in the comments below. I'm a big boy, I can handle it. Let's hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.